This episode of The Clear Out was recorded on the 28th of March 2023 at home in Wicklow. And it is a journey from mucky earth to beautiful poetry via the resistance to generic podcast material and fascism. Okay? That's the journey. There's existentialism in there. There's philosophy references. There's George Orwell and 1984. There's working the soil. There's green grass. And there are unseen poems as a statement of anti-fascism. That's what's coming up. So if that sounds remotely enticing, intriguing, I hope I can deliver. So only one way to find out. I will see you around the corner. Cheers.
Not gonna change my mind, leaving the dream behind, keep my emoji inside.
Hi, my name is Dara Clear, and you're listening to The Clear Out. You're very welcome. If you're feeling like me today, you're wrecked, knackered, shagged, rooted, not in the chakra grounded energy sense. I feel weary, very weary today, but it's a nice kind of weary. At least I'm choosing to experience it that way. It's not a weariness that's coming on the back of a lot of exercise or hard physical graft. I just woke up tired. I seem I may be reaching an age where I simply need more sleep. That's a challenging idea to me, because I quite enjoy not needing a huge amount of sleep. But other things can contribute to a general fatigue, a general weariness. And I was feeling great yesterday, very clear-headed, good energy, and on Sunday as well. Possibly the result of my first sea swim in a few weeks, having been out of the water because of illness and bad conditions, bad sea conditions. But this morning I woke up and things just didn't feel quite right. But the good thing is, sometimes that type of tiredness, it can bring a very pleasurable weight to the body, where you're forced to sink into yourself a bit more. And you know, it's not a very auspicious way to begin an episode by saying, I'm really tired. That's not very encouraging for the listener. But I'm actually feeling very, very positive about it and calm. And I think that's a nice thing to associate with this type of weight in the body, that it's bringing sort of a calmness and a stillness and almost a serenity, totally undeserved. But hey, it's my life. This is my moment, and I'm choosing to do this with it. And I'm indoors, and I've got some layers on, and it's drizzly and grey and not very nice outside, although there's a clear sense of spring having sprung, especially with the clocks changing last Sunday. So we're going to be getting the brighter evenings. And I'm just waiting for the rain to stop so I can start cutting the grass again and getting the front and back gardens into better shape, because it's been a morass, a swamp, very mucky, and yeah, I'm not enjoying that. I was about to start going on about how lovely it is to walk on nice grass. But that is a sensory pleasure, and I'm just not a fan of muck, clingy, claggy, sticky muck. I don't enjoy it, and even if I'm working, doing physical work, labouring, manual labour, digging trenches, or whatever. Heavy boots made heavier by wet, sticky mud, I hate. I remember years ago, I may have told you this before, I remember years ago working in doing a bit of building work, a bit of labouring in London in a waterworks, and I had to go down into a sunken silo, 40 or 50 feet below ground level, and there was digging to be done, and the ground was like clay, like potter's clay. It was so unbelievably thick and dense and solid, but also super sticky. And I remember going down there. You'd get in early, go down in the dark, and spend the day in the dark, apart from coming up for your breaks. That kind of work can be extraordinarily challenging. Not the physical aspect, just the sensory aspect. So anyway, grass, walking on grass. And I must say, I'm looking out the window here. The grass is long and it's wet, but it's a lovely shade of green. And yeah, there's something, even to look at it, there's a palpable freshness and a palpable newness to it, which is really lovely. And funnily enough, the other day, funnily enough, on an unrelated matter, not really unrelated because it's to do with nature and earth and the ground. I was driving back from my swim on Sunday morning and coming along the road. I come along to, that takes me away from the sea and back inland, and I just kind of came around a corner and was struck by this, by what was to me a sort of a timeless, iconic image, which was simply of two men bent over working in a field, and the field was almost entirely tilled soil, and there was no hedge or fence to obscure the view. And at the moment of seeing them, there were no indications of modernity anywhere, and the way the light struck the men, they were silhouetted, and it just kind of took my breath away for a moment as I kind of took it in, and I just had an instinctive kind of arrest of just like, oh, I've just travelled back in time, and this could have happened at any time over the last few hundred years. It was extraordinary. And I realised as I drove past, they were wearing, modern clothes, contemporary clothes, but I wouldn't have noticed that as they were in shadow. And they were planting saplings, baby trees, on a Sunday morning, which is an unusual time to see lads doing that kind of work. But the sky and the rising field was the backdrop, and they were in the foreground. And they could have been something from, I don't know, from a Jack B. Yeats painting. And it was, there was just a real, I suppose beauty is the word that comes to mind. There was a beauty and a rightness and a healthiness, an honesty to it, a purity, because honesty is a very subjective term and maybe that colours it in the wrong way. But there was something so elemental and irrefutable about the action that they were doing. Standing on the soil, putting something into the soil, using their hands, nothing else around, no machinery, no modern equipment, no Wi-Fi. And it was just this lovely little moment. And it just jumped back in my head there as I was looking out the window at the grass. The grass is green on the green. Anyway, so yes, 10 minutes. 10 minutes in, just like that, boom. And you're welcome. Of course you're welcome. If you're here, you're welcome. It's a very simple premise. If you come, you're welcome. If you didn't come, you're not listening, so I'm not talking to you. So go away. So thank you if you're listening. I'm very grateful for your presence, the presence of your ears, your mind, your being, no matter what your being is doing. I'm trying to really get a sense of what this podcast is about, because I'm closing in on 100 episodes, and that means I'll have been doing this for nearly 2 years very soon, and I've managed to pop it out once a week. That's not a euphemism. I'm talking about releasing the episode of the podcast, and I'm not really seeing any growth. As the actress said to the bishop, no growth. I'm not really seeing any growth. I'm not really seeing any increase in my listenership. And that's frustrating. But it can't really be anybody's fault but mine. So I'm really trying to go, what the hell is this thing that I'm doing here once a week? And who is it for? And I'm thinking this way because I look at different sort of podcast experts and see what they say about how to make these things work. But I when I say I see them, I mean I do. I glance at 2 Instagram posts and go, oh yeah, okay. And that's about the extent of my research. But I realize there's a tension between how I want to do this and how to kind of raise its profile and how to reach a larger audience, because I really want to lean into how I do this, which is quite ramshackle and unpredictable and loose. Loose to the point of being in complete disarray, only held together by my determination to impose order on the scrambled eggs of my thoughts and impulses and interests, all in service of this version of sort of wellness interrogation. And maybe I've backed myself into a corner by describing this as a wellness podcast. Maybe that's too reductive. but it kind of is. It is a response to so much curated content and so much sort of polished content that's out there, and I don't want that, because I'm not selling anything, and I'm not trying to perfect or hone my brand. And so there's a tension there, because maybe that's what I should be doing. Maybe that's what this is supposed to do, to make it, to elevate it, and to make it succeed in that conventional sense of success, which means, huge listenership and advertising, sponsorship, money, income, and then add-ons and other opportunities. And I mean, yeah, that would be nice. That would be nice if I could make that happen. But ultimately, the success of this for me is what it does for me on a personal level. And I enjoy doing it. And it's something I've been doing either in written form, that I started in written form with the blog, theclearout.com. That website is coming soon. I'm actually working on it at the moment, trying to dot I's and cross T's and get it over the line. So, hola Danielle, if you're listening, I'm working on that. Daniel's my man who helps me with the branding of the podcast, and he's put together a website, but I have to fill in. I have to do a lot of inputting to get the website sort of launch ready, and I just haven't had time over the last couple of months. So I finally started looking at that yesterday, and it's a bit tedious and labour intensive, but grand, I'll get there. But yeah, the whole thing, I don't want to. It's hilarious. It's like this is the Bob Dylan controversy, going from acoustic to plugged in. To the howls of the purist fans. But there's a truth in that. And maybe there's fear as well. Like, maybe there's fear of stepping into uncomfortable territory. And for me, uncomfortable territory is pushing hard in terms of promotion, branding, marketing, making this into something else. So I'm trying to just kind of chill out on that front and go, don't worry, just keep working on making what I'm doing each week good, consistent, authentic. And that word authentic is important here to me, because I would love that people would listen to this and go, yeah, that's real. What I talk about, the stuff I talk about, the way I talk about it, that people will go, that's real, that's relatable, that's normal, and I'm not being sold anything, and I'm not being given sound bites and cute little things to walk away with. I was listening to a podcast last week, and I had to turn it off after about 5 minutes because I was so irritated by what I was hearing. And previously, when I used to buy newspapers regularly, before so much stuff switched online, and I get 99.9% of my news online now, but it wouldn't be uncommon for me to throw the newspaper away from myself in disgust at whatever had ticked me off or had made my indignation come to the fore. But it wouldn't be unusual to fire the newspaper away from myself in disgust. And I had a similar experience last week. I was listening to a podcast, and the podcast, it was funny, this podcast was recommended to me by an actor I worked with recently. How are you, Fionn Foley, if you're listening? And it's called Diary of a CEO. I think the host's name, is it Stephen Bartlett or something like that? Some young, very successful English guy I can't remember. His blurb is on his podcast. I read it, but I've forgotten. But, you know, another super success story of some young entrepreneurial type. And I did listen to one where he had a long interview with Seth Rogen, which was fine. And then last week he was interviewing, is it Simon Sinek? Is that his name? Simon Sinek. He's kind of done a lot of TED Talks and public speaking and preaches sort of optimism, positivity. Has definitely got a couple of books out there about sort of business leadership and kind of more tuned in, emotionally intelligent leadership and how to do well in the workplace, I guess. And yeah, I've seen some clips of his online and he always seems to come across pretty well. But I wasn't overly interested in him. I sort of had, my instinct was, that's a pretty good guy and he's doing good stuff. Anyway, he was on this podcast and he was a returning guest. And the hook for the podcast was he was going to talk about loneliness, and I thought that was kind of interesting. And after the initial couple of minutes of the mutual kind of love in and you're so amazing and your episodes being the most popular, blah blah blah, and already I'm resisting kind of going any further, but he started to talk about how he hadn't been in great form and was feeling a bit lonely in his life. I'm paraphrasing monstrously here. And he didn't like talking about mental health as mental health. He preferred to talk about it as mental fitness. And again, that was kind of a trigger for me. I was like, oh, for fuck's sake, here we go again, Just make it a nice little catchy thing. I'll put my little stamp on it. And then, but I was still willing, okay, I'll keep listening, grand. And then he just said something to the effect of, he had been feeling, I don't know, I can't even remember, basically. It was like he'd been having some sort of personal low day or a low mood, and just not feeling great or, particularly motivated. This guy looks like he's in his 30s or 40s. And he said, but then I thought it was okay because, I realised, it's okay, it's just part of being human. And I thought, holy shit. I said, is that it? Is that the personal insight? Is that the Damascene revelation? I just thought, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And it was so unbelievably, I'm not even sure, I don't know if I'll be able to find the words to convey my sort of disappointment, disenchantment. That's not even right, because it's not like my expectations were that high. But this was an indication that he was pitching at such a low level, that there was nothing remotely revelatory in what he said. And I was going, hold on, this guy's been in the public sphere for 10 or 15 years, becoming enormously successful, preaching positive psychology, and positivity oriented strategies for success in business and in life. And then this was his kind of his nugget. And I had to turn it off straight away. I was just like, I can't keep going with this. You can hear me. You can hear that I'm struggling to articulate my issue with this. I just found myself, my instinct was, you have nothing to say. If you're only coming to that conclusion now, you have nothing to say. Now that's very disingenuous on my part, because I accept that he probably has lots of interesting things to say and has obviously done so to enormous and consistent positive reception. But I was I just found myself astonished at the I don't know, the hubris to present that in a conversation as something that was meant to be novel, something that was meant to be, new and kind of profound. And I thought, okay, maybe if this is a podcast for 8-year-olds, I just thought, get the hell out of here. This is like a complete loss of perspective. And I just had this sense of, okay, so this is just two really, really successful people rubbing up against each other and going, that feels nice. And I just don't find that interesting. And and it's a reason why sometimes when I listen to podcasts hosted by celebrities, interviewing other celebrities, that also is not very interesting. It really depends on the personalities involved. That if you've listened to the show before, I mean, my lifelong interest in movies and acting, actors, creative people in those fields, that definitely colours what I listen to a lot in terms of the podcasts I listen to. Very much, movie oriented, and that's fine. But then sometimes, listening to interviews with actors can be very, I don't know. It can all get a bit. It can all get a bit lovey. It can all get a bit lovey-dovey. I mean, I've spoken about this before. I listened to Smartless, the podcast presented by those three funny fellas, Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, and Sean Hayes, and they just interview a who's who of big Hollywood names, and they're very funny. Their dynamic between the three of them is very funny. But sometimes when they get to the actual interview parts, it can all get a bit sort of sycophantic, with lots of sort of namaste, pray hands, expressions of gratitude and performative humility, which it's kind of gross and not that interesting at all. And so this is a way of sort of circling back to my sort of I don't want to call it a dilemma, but this area that I'm looking at now in terms of how to sharpen the focus of what I'm doing here on my podcast. And I realize since the very first blog post I put on my website, which is 10 years ago, I seem to revel in mediocrity. I mean, mediocrity and mediocre. These are kind of dirty words, because they shoot down the notion of exceptionalism, and it's my instinct and what I feel I perceive online, in the online space, that so many people are presenting versions of exceptionalism, and particularly all the hyper positive stuff, the so-called toxic positivity, the positivity messaging that's curated to within an inch of its life, until it just doesn't resemble anything close to reality, and it's usually delivered by people they've got this kind of generically pseudo blissed out look in their eyes that's simultaneously giving an impression of being inspired while also being totally vapid, and it seems to involve a lot of smiling and a lot of dwelling on personal insights. And I mean, I could be describing myself, but it just doesn't ring true. It just doesn't ring true, and it comes back then to this, like what I'm doing here. It really, I'm trying to offer an antidote to all of that, an antidote to the relentless shininess, without it being a gratuitous wallowing in failure, because that's not especially interesting or inspiring or moving. And I think what I'm doing here on some level has great potential to inspire, because it's really about going, yeah, most of us are just tipping along and not doing amazingly. But we all have our moments of triumph on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis, and that is what I find that I come back to again and again. It's the everyday. It's the everyday battles. It's the day-by-day struggles. It's the repetition. And I mean, it's a very philosophical thing ultimately, because this is the sort of the existentialist crisis, with a touch of Nietzsche thrown in there as well. The eternal recurrence, going round and round and round and round again and again and again and again, and asking ourselves, how am I still here? Why haven't I progressed to a better place? Why am I still sitting here with myself? How incredibly boring how incredibly boring and depressing this is. And the existentialists, the likes of Camus, they're, these are the guys who are just kind of going, this is all for nothing. People like Samuel Beckett, it's like, this is all a joke. The journey towards the end, the journey towards finality, the journey towards becoming a black dot, the full stop, where, from where do we find meaning? From where do we find motivation? Is it ever going to arrive? What are we waiting for? Is life just a waiting room? Is life just a departure lounge? And yeah, I don't know what, like that's we're in very, very subjective territory there. And ultimately I come back to I try to come back to now and go, well, what am I doing now? Where am I now? What's going on in my life now, and what can I do now to best apply myself, or best utilize myself, or to best take something from this moment? And certainly when it comes to parenting, being a father, when I'm with my daughter, who is now 9.5, I try to kind of maximize what I'm getting from time spent with her, because that is a very particular time vehicle. A child getting older before your eyes, and watching a childhood accelerate past you until it's going to be gone. And I'm in no way, I'm in no way feeling maudlin or negative or desperate or fearful about that inevitability. It is what it is, but I find it very healthy sometimes to look at my daughter and go, this is it. This is her childhood. It's happening now, and I'm lucky enough to be very involved in it by virtue of the choices I've made, and I'm really grateful. And when it comes to some of my parenting decisions, I try to remind myself, yeah, it's okay. Let her have a positive memory. Let her have something nice happen, because even a year from now, what she wants will be different. What she enjoys will be different. In 2 or 3 years, God knows if she'll even talk to me. And I don't think it's a bad idea to sort of take that into other areas of your life. We tend... No, I shouldn't speak for we. I can say that it's easy to view adulthood as stasis almost, that you're a child and then you're not, and that's it, baby. And it can be a great kind of door closer on your imagination to go, well, this is it then. This is the grown-up stuff. Oh, did I talk about the lilies last week? Sorry, there's lilies in here, and a petal just fell off. Oh wait, no, it was a leaf. I'm sorry, a leaf just fell off the lily. Are they tiger lilies? They've got the white petals with purple in them. Part of a large bouquet of flowers that I was very fortuitously given, and which I was then able to pass on to my wife. Happy birthday! Oh, they're lovely. Let me just take that card out of there. You don't need that. Boom. So the lilies, they won't last much longer. And I don't think I mentioned them last week, but the room, the home studio here at #blessed, it just was filled with the scent of the lilies. Yeah, I can still get it there. It's not as strong as it was last week, so you know they're on the turn. Now that just completely broke my train of thought. Applying that attitude to your life of it's passing, enjoy it now. Don't get into the deferred living. I was going to say deferred pleasure. That's not it. I don't mind putting off a treat. But deferred living, I have an issue with. We need to do this, and then in 10 years we can... I'm like, what are you talking about? You could be dead tomorrow. You've got to live now, even if it's on a very modest scale. I believe you've got to find those moments in the day, every day. Even one moment's enough just to go, this is lovely. I don't know what that is. Sometimes for me it's just the mug of coffee I make in the morning. Sometimes it's being in the garden with the dog in the morning, good old Pepper. Sometimes it is looking up and seeing a red kite or a buzzard flying overhead, or seeing the trees blow in the wind, or listening to a tune. Now, on that note of nice things, I was looking at something earlier this morning on on Instagram. Someone had put up a snippet of an old interview with George Orwell, and he was being interviewed about 1984. And fundamentally, he was describing the book as a parody, which is a rather unusual word to use to describe that particular work. But in spite of that, he went on to assert that the bleak vision of the novel was a very possible future reality for society, and that ultimately the worst end of that, the sort of the image that he presented, was this sort of gradual disappearance of all things treasurable, all things ecstatic. He referred to the sex impulse dying, to the disappearance of orgasms, and he wasn't presenting this in any sort of salacious, sensual way. He's been very clinical and cold in how he presented this. And he said what we're going to be left with is the image of a boot, a jackboot in the human face, and that will be what humanity will have been reduced to. And his final exhortation then was, we must not let this happen. And it was, it was kind of like, whoa, this isn't just a cute song or a kitten in a coffee cup. This is some pretty heavy stuff here. And as the morning kind of went on this morning, I found myself thinking, well, what is this? Like, how do you stop fascism fundamentally, if that's what he's referring to? Fascism, or his sort of commentary, I suppose, if you think of Animal Farm and 1984, the sort of fascist, the rise of fascist states, the rise of controlling fascistic governments, the rise of warped, power susceptible communism, the rise of corruption, basically, the rise of human corruption, venality in the offices of power, to such an extent that it crushes the citizenship and crushes normal people and betrays ideals that were presented as being the saving ideas of society. And he would have been, of course, referring to what he was witnessing in mid 20th century Europe, and the rise of probably the rise of Nazism, the rise of fascism in Italy, the rise of Stalinism in the Soviet Union. And he was, I suppose, able to see what and what he presented in 1984 is like what that might look like if one of those kinds of powers took hold in England. And that dystopian book gave us the phrase Big Brother, and presented this this vision of absolute control. And so I was trying to sort of unpack this before I was recording today, and I was kind of going, okay, well, there's that obvious, there's the obvious sort of understanding of fascism in governmental shape, and we think of dictators and a brutal police force, monolithic government ideas, monolithic iconography, and speaking of which, I see Donald Trump had a very ominous looking political rally in Waco at the weekend. There were some very sinister images of him presented in the media, standing tall and proud with a huge screen behind him that was showing the Capitol riots from 2021, and then the rhetoric he was using was, I suppose, very provocative and belligerent and inflammatory, divisive as ever. So he kind of fits the bill in a way. He continues to be an extraordinarily repellent figure, and a lightning rod for such leering intolerance and hatred for so many Americans, and this very ugly populism that he represents. It's I find it very troubling, because it's he continues to give a green light to very unattractive human impulses, and in no way does he represent anything resembling unity. Although you could argue that, well, he represents unity on one side of the political divide in the States. But in any case, I was trying to sort of think about another aspect of fascism, or another aspect of totalitarianism. And I mean, if we define fascism as enforced rule, an enforced sort of rule book, or an enforced vision of what society should be, and you think fundamentally it's dogma with a truncheon attached. It's dogma kicked into your head via the jackboot, and I suppose the lie we tell ourselves, often is that, well, it always looks like Hitler's Nazis. It always looks like Mussolini's black shirts. It looks like Stalin's enforcers, or it looks like Pinochet's brutalist approach to dissenters. And the lie we tell ourselves is that the governments that don't do that are the good guys, and the established kind of institutions are the good guys. And that's, I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all on any level, but those ideas have to be challenged and explored as well, and interrogated. And certainly if you look at the report that just came out about the London Metropolitan Police, it was a damning indictment of institutional racism, misogyny and homophobia in that organisation, which has been dogged by controversies and police failings for years and years and years. You're going back decades at this stage, and they don't seem any closer to solving what they are. But anyway, sorry, that's a digression. I was thinking this question of like, how do you stop fascism? And I was thinking, Jesus, I'm not particularly political. I'm not particularly political in the sense that I don't want to. I've never been motivated to go out and protest. I've never been motivated to join a political party. I've never lobbied a political representative. It's just not where my instincts lead me. And so, it's not that I don't care, although I certainly didn't care when I was a teenager, a kid or a teenager. My political convictions probably were ignited in my early to mid-20s. But I was thinking more about this idea that fascism lays down a very strict template of what can and can't be said, and what can and can't be sung, and what can and can't be read. So fascism doesn't want to invite any form of dissent. It doesn't want to leave the door open for debate. It doesn't want to hear the counter argument. And I found myself thinking about about so much stuff that's online, and so many of these figures online, and who nothing to do with politics. I'm just talking about the sort of what passes for content, what passes for discussion, what passes for ideas, or the sharing of ideas. And in a way, I was thinking about this podcast that I was talking about earlier, the one I had to switch off. And I found myself thinking, God, if that's where we're at in terms of interrogation of personal psychology, we're in deep trouble. And yet there's a huge amount of mutual affirmation and mutual appreciation and chin stroking and head nodding. And there are times it just feels like it's a little bit, the emperor's new clothes. And there's just a very unchallenged, widespread consent. And I thought, well, is that not on some level a type of fascism? And I'm not even really getting that close to identity politics and culture wars and woke positions, so-called woke positions, which, and I mean, because I've spoken about that at different times through, over the history of the podcast. And I think they do often those politics and ideas and flashpoints can bring with them a terrible intolerance and a kind of a gleeful, willful desire to just simply shut down the voice of dissent and the opposing view. And I've certainly been troubled by that as an aspect of that. A lot of the discourse in those areas, it just feels very absolutist. And I can't not make a connection between that and a type of fascism. But to go back to the idea then that there is, and this feeds into the sort of the 1984 iconography and imagery and symbolism and the world depicted in that book as a world that's very grey and grey, monochrome, joyless, ominous, sinister, with no deviation or fluctuation or spontaneity. And focusing on that sort of area, I found myself thinking is a way to resist fascism. Simply to find pleasure in all the different things we can find pleasure in, and particularly aesthetically, and particularly in the world of the senses, particularly in the world of artistic expression, and just for the sake of it. Like, just for the sake of it, not, well, here's my anti-fascist statement, here's my anti-fascist song, my anti-fascist piece of theatre. I mean, they have their places, they have their place as well, of course. But I just found myself wondering, is that, if you're not going to be a political activist, is that the way to resist the singularity of thought, the singularity of vision, the imposition? And that's what it is. Ultimately, fascism is an imposition of values, an imposition of a rigid code of behaviour, and more invasively, the imposition of a code of thinking. And that's ultimately where fascism wants to get most of all, is inside your head, and to control what's in there. And that's of course why there's such a fear of free speech in fascist regimes, and such a determination to impose the strictest possible forms of censorship. So yeah, that was where my instinct led me to go, well, is that not its own act of protest? And in a way that might be colossally naive. But the protest is not alone. It's not alone to say, I'm not interested in fascism. I'm not interested in the restrictive narrowing of worldview, and the restrictive narrowing of social mores and what is socially tolerated. It's not only that I'm not interested in that, but also that I'm so not interested in that I'm not even going to engage in a direct act of opposition. I'm not even going to engage in the idea of protest. I'm simply going to immerse myself in a way of thinking and a way of living that has nothing to do with what the fascism of choice represents. And as I said before, my line of thinking was, is that then to just immerse oneself in embracing human creativity, perhaps? Because there's nothing creative in fascism, is there? Because it's all about control and restriction and uniformity, literally and behaviourally. And so creativity is deviation, and creativity is running away from the factory, and creativity is following the impulse and following curiosity, and seeing what form of expression that leads to. So So yeah, so listen. I didn't really know that I was going to go there with that today, but that's where I've ended up. But funny enough, I brought in beside me today. I brought in two little books because I walked into the other room, and my wife asked me if I was stalling, and what she meant by that was, am I stalling starting the podcast, because I wasn't sure what the hell I was going to talk about. I was a little bit, but I thought there are times, and believe me, it happens frequently, and maybe you can relate to this. There are times when you're just sick of your own words and sick of your own thoughts. And so to wrap up this episode, I'm going to read some unseen poems. I brought in two beautiful little poetry books with me beside they're sitting here beside the microphone. They're both Everyman's Library Pocket Poets editions. Yeah? The Everyman Library Pocket Poets editions. So they're little like hand, nice little, what size is this? It's not A3, is it one below A3? No, A3 is going the other direction, A5. One is Love Songs and Sonnets. I feel like I've had this book for 20 years or more. Lovely little hardback editions. I'm gonna see if I can find the first published date on this. Yeah, 1997. I may have had it as long as that. What would that be? 26 years. And a more recent one, which is Poems of New York, which I may even have bought in New York, and I was last in New York in 2009. This edition is from 2002. And I dip in and out of these books occasionally and have different spells. I've been very enthusiastic about them. But I just thought, you know what? And this will be nice now for my thesis, my anti-fascism thesis. I'm just going to randomly dip and read the first poem or poems I see. So I'm going to finish up with these today. We might get 3 or 4 poems, and it'll just be refreshing. it'll be refreshing to get away from my fascism, my insistence that you listen to my voice alone and my words alone. So I'm just opening the New York poems. I'm going to see where I fetch up. And you know what? That first one that fetched up looks very long. So I'm going to skip. This is called Letter to NY. And it's for Louise Crane. And it's by Elizabeth Bishop. In your next letter, I wish you'd say where you are going and what you are doing. How are the plays, and after the plays, what other pleasures you're pursuing? Taking cabs in the middle of the night, driving as if to save your soul, where the road goes round and round the park, and the meter glares like a moral owl. And the trees look so queer and green, standing alone in big black caves, and suddenly you're in a different place, where everything seems to happen in waves. And most of the jokes you just can't catch, like dirty words rubbed off a slate, and the songs are loud but somehow dim, and it gets so terribly late. And coming out of the brownstone house to the grey sidewalk, the watered street, one side of the buildings rises with the sun like a glistening field of wheat. Wheat, not oats, dear. I'm afraid if it's wheat, it's none of your sowing. Nevertheless, I'd like to know what you're doing and where you are going. Can't remember I've never read that one before. That was nice. Okay, that was from Poems of New York, Elizabeth Bishop, Letter to NY. Okay, let me see. Love Songs and Sonnets. It's going to do a random open. Now, oh well, that's a great title. Cynthia on Horseback. This is by Philip Ayres, and his dates are 1638 to 1712. Let's see what we make of this. Cynthia on Horseback. Fair Cynthia mounted on her sprightly pad, which in white robe with silver fringe was clad, and swift as wind his graceful steps did move, as with his beauteous guide he'd been in love. Though fierce, yet humble still to her command, obeying every touch of her fair hand. Her golden bit his foaming mouth did check, it spread his crest and raised his bending neck. She was the rose upon this hill of snow, her sparkling beauty made this glorious show, whence secret flames men in their bosoms took. The Graces and the Cupids her surround, attending her, while cruel she does wound with switch her horse, and hearts with every look. Well now, that all sounded a bit racy. Cynthia on Horseback, indeed. Okay, I'm going to give you two more before I wrap up. Oh, the sun has come out. Isn't that lovely? I'm going to take Pepper the dog for a walk. There are some strange, formations on the window. They're like spores. Spores. They're a little alien looking on the outside. There's a nice cobweb up in the corner. Very gossamery looking one. Okay, here we go. Here's another one from New York. This is by Howard Moss, and it's called The Roof Garden. A nervous hose is dribbling on the tar this morning on this rooftop where I'm watching you move among your sparse pinchpenny flowers. Poor metronomes of colour 1 month long that pull the sun's rays in as best they can and suck life up from 1 mere inch of dirt. There's water in the sky, but it won't come down. Once we counted the skyline's water towers, barrels made of shingle, fat and high, an African village suspended above the needle hardness of New York that needs more light than God provides to make it soft, that needs the water in the water towers to snake through pipe past all the elevators to open up in bowls and baths and showers. Soon our silence will dissolve in talk that needs some water and some sun, or it will go the same way as before. Dry repetitions of the ill we bear each other, the baited poles of light angling through the way the sun today fishes among the clouds. Now you are through watering geraniums, and now you go to the roof edge to survey the real estate of architectural air, tense forms wrought up, torn down, replaced, to be torn down again, so much like us. Your head against the sky is topped by a tower clock blocks away, whose 2 black hands are closing on the hour. And I look down into the street below, rinsed fresh this morning by a water truck, down which a girl, perky in high heels, clops by, serenely unaware of us, of the cables, gas lines, telephone wires, and water mains writhing underfoot. Nice imagery, no? None of these three. I hadn't read any of these three before, so I'm going for the last. I'll see what fetches up. I'll back to the love songs, sonnets and love songs. I'll try and get one towards the back and see if that gives me something. Now, let me see. Letty's Globe on one page or To My Mother. Let me see. Dun dun dun. Alright, I'll try To My Mother for the crack. This is by George Barker. His dates are 1913 to 1991. Most near, most dear, most loved and most far, under the window where I often found her, sitting as huge as Asia, seismic with laughter, gin and chicken helpless in her Irish hand, irresistible as Rabelais, but most tender for the lame dogs and hurt birds that surround her. She is a procession no one can follow after, but be like a little dog following a brass band. She will not glance up at the bomber, or condescend to drop her gin and scuttle to a cellar, but lean on the mahogany table like a mountain whom only faith can move. And so I send, oh, all my faith and all my love to tell her that she will move from morning into morning. And those last two mornings, the first morning, so that she will move from mourning is M-O-U-R, to mourn someone or something, and then the second morning, from that morning into morning, as in the beginning of the day. Okay, cool. I hadn't read that one either, so there you go. I mean, I obviously I've never gone through every poem in these books. All those 4 poems were all new to me. Maybe they were new to you, maybe you're familiar with them, but they were all nice in their own way. So there you go. That's my anti-fascism demonstration. 4 random poems, 4 distinctive viewpoints, 4 subjects, and all from different times. So that's nice. One going back to the 17th century. That was Cynthia on horseback, wasn't it? Go on, Cynthia. Get up that hill. Okay, I'm done. And there you go. Thank you so much for listening. You can reach out to me, show me some love on social media. The links will be there wherever you're listening to this. You can become a supporter, a financial supporter of the podcast, this independent production. You can do that using either the supporter link. There should be a supporter link somewhere, or where you can make a one-off donation, or if you want to use Patreon, you can become a patron and join the ranks. Nearly 100 episodes. I think I have 4 patrons. That is, I mean, I'm obviously doing something really wrong in how I'm approaching this. It's hard to ask for help. I think that's part of it. It's hard to ask for help. And here, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to conclude this episode. And this is very dicey because the chances of someone having started this and listened to it to the bitter end are slim, particularly a new listener. But I'm going to do what they call what's known in the business, the podcasting business, as a CTA, a call to action. If you listen to this podcast, if you like it, if you enjoy it, now that's if you're a regular listener. But even if this is the first episode you've ever listened to, and you liked it, you enjoyed it, it did something for you, it made you think, it made you smile, it made you laugh, it made you reach for the stop button. If you did like that, please consider sharing it with someone else. Consider sharing it with everyone that you think might enjoy it. Anyone you know that might be looking for an antidote to all the curated, perfected product that's out there online in many, many different forms. Give it to anyone who is looking for something that's a little bit dissolute and a little bit messy and slightly chaotic, and yet has a through line, and yet is anchored to the earth. Because I think that's what this is. It's meant to be an antidote to all the performative, curated, glossy crap that I think is not good for us at all, that twists our brain in funny shapes and makes us anxious and invites us to compare our inadequacy with the perfection of others. And I just go, no, screw all that. Let's just be normal. Let's be real. Let's just go on this journey together and, live each day through the ups and downs. And don't be afraid to have those downs real, because that's what they are. We can't make light of them, and we shouldn't. So anyway, there you go. So yeah, do consider sharing, and even consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/theclearout. And the thinking there is, it's like if you saw me and said, Jesus, I really enjoyed that episode. Here, let me buy you a coffee. Or here, let me buy a sandwich. A medium level sandwich. Something affordable, not like some ridiculously overpriced sandwich that you get in some wanky restaurant. Here, let me buy you a sandwich. Let me buy you a couple of Star bars. I like an old Star bar. You can do that via Patreon. €3 or €4, €5. Is it a month or every fortnight? I don't know. Consider doing that, because that would help. That would help me go, this is worthwhile. Apart from what it does for me, it would make me believe that, okay, this has legs and can go somewhere and can grow. And then I can say to my wife, look, 5 patrons, not just 4. It only took 100 episodes. Okay, that's it. That's all I've got. Thank you very much for listening, and mind yourselves, and stick it to the man, fight the power, read poems, listen to music, make art, follow your curiosity. That's the Anti-Fascist campaign. Okay? All right, I'll talk to you real soon, next week in fact. Mind yourselves, take care, lots of love. See ya. Bye.